Welcome. Thank you all for coming out, and you should have a prayer that's been handed out at each table, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Anyway, today is the second part of a 2-week series, just sharing, thank you so much, sharing what I was able to see, do, and learn over my sabbatical. Last week I talked about the first 2 months. I spent a month in Spain, followed by a month in France, and then last month was spent in Italy. Originally I was going to do the Italian section in the middle, but our middle daughter Margaret said to me, "Dad, the Olympics are going to be taking place soon, and train tickets are being all booked up, and if you wait too long, you're not going to be able to travel much around France." So I ended up going to France a month earlier than anticipated. The weather was fabulous. That was great. The downside is that by the time I got to Italy, it was about 85 degrees on many days, and then it got up to 95. Originally, my plan was to walk something called the Way of St. Francis, which is about 500 miles, and it starts in Florence and goes all the way down to Rome. Now, I decided not to do that because one is I had done about 2 weeks of walking, and to be honest, carrying a heavy backpack up and down the mountains in the Pyrenees and then along the coast of Brittany, I thought, I've done enough of that, and my Italian language skills had just evaporated. So I used to be kind of semi-fluent in speaking Italian. We had an Italian nanny from Calabria, and one Italian priest once said to me, "That is not Italian. That is una brutta lingua." It's an ugly language. So Italy, if you're not aware of this, has over 500 dialects. And you can go from here to a place like Portchester or Rye, New York, and encounter a completely different dialect. They had forgotten these dialects for decades. They'd stopped teaching them in the schools. And our nanny came from the next town over from us in the Philadelphia area called Ambler, Pennsylvania. 2/3 of the little village of Maida in Ambler in Calabria moved to Ambler, Pennsylvania. They worked as stonemasons and took up other jobs. More and more their family came to join them. And so they were still speaking Calabrese in Ambler, Pennsylvania, when they had forgotten how to speak it, and especially many of the young people in the town of Maida in Calabria. But recently, over the last 20 years, the schools have started to teach the dialects again, so they become living languages among young people. Anyway, I was kind of gassed in terms of hiking. It had gotten way too hot. Carry a backpack, especially when it gets out to 95 degrees, and every day ends going up to a mountain village when you're walking in Italy. You're totally spent, you're maybe out of water, your legs are giving out, and then you have to walk up this steep incline into some little village. So that, and the fact that my Italian was so bad, I decided, I need to resurrect that. And walking a remote trail was not going to be the way to do that. So I signed up to study for 2 weeks in Bologna at a school where Adriana Wiles. Adriana, could you stand for a minute, and then Tom next to you also? So thanks to the Wiles, I got the idea of studying at this Italian school where Adriana studied for 2 weeks. And then they had walked part of the Way of St. Francis for a week, and can tell you, anyone who's interested in knowing more about that, they used, I think you used Slowways, is that right? Yeah, Slowways is an organization that can line up all sorts of pilgrimages for you, and they arrange to have your bags taken ahead, so you walk lightly, and that's a smart way to do it. They have all the reservations made for you, and have little maps and things, so they had a great experience doing that. Now, the other reason I decided not to walk the Way of St. Francis is there's no real clarity that Francis walked that way, but he's walked all over Italy. So I think part of this is to try to capture more people who want to do these wonderful pilgrimages and be outdoors. There's so many people. There are over about 350,000 people walking part of the Camino de Santiago de Compostela every year. 350,000. So many of them now are saying, what can I do after that? What is the next thing I might want to do? And so we look at different Caminos in Spain. I've done a total of 10 Caminos between Spain, Portugal, and France now. And so there are magnificent ways to be outside, to commune with nature, to visit holy places, to meet really interesting people, to eat delicious food, to work off the Episcopate. Lots of reasons to do this. So I want to begin with a prayer that I probably should have shared last week because I found it in France. I found it in a church there, and it just is called Prendre le temps. Prendre le temps de réfléchir, c'est la source du pouvoir. Prendre le temps de lire, c'est la base de la sagesse. Prendre le temps de jouer, c'est la secret pour rester jeune. So why don't we pray that together in English? I just quickly translated this morning, but you have it before you. And if you take one thing away today, it's a wonderful prayer just to use. I'm using this on a daily basis, and it reminds me so much of where to prioritize and spend time. So let us pray together. Take time to reflect. It is the source of power. Take time to read. It is the foundation of wisdom. Take time to play. It is the secret to staying young. Take time to explore silence. It is the favorable moment for finding God. Take time to maintain an open spirit. It is the occasion to aid others. Take time to love and be loved. It is a gift from heaven. Take time to laugh. It is the music of the soul. Take time to share. It is the secret of happiness. Take time to dream. It is the future on which one depends. Take time to pray. It is the greatest power on earth. Now, if you do know another language, I recommend getting a Bible in that language, and also getting some kind of prayer book. The Book of Common Prayer is printed in Spanish, French. I believe it may be in English. I'm using a Franciscan prayer book right now, and prayers just break open when you're using a different language. So if you feel like, gosh, I know these prayers by rote, if that's working and helping you in your spiritual journey, wonderful. If you're kind of looking for something new, try getting something in a language that you know well enough, and then to be able to just pray that quietly. And you don't have to pray a lot. You don't have to read like 5 Psalms, a couple passages of Scripture and 5 pages of prayer. Just a little bit puts you into the presence of God. It kind of sets you open to that and can reveal wonderful things. And never, ever underestimate how much our Lord can share with you in a very small amount of time. And so, thanks, Adriana. I decided to go to Bologna. I had a parishioner in my last church who's one of the senior people at Comcast who studied for a year in Bologna. And when she told me about this, I just parked that in the back of my brain as a place I really wanted to go sometime. So Bologna was kind of on my bucket list of places to visit in Italy. It's the 7th largest city in Italy. It has a population of 400,000 and a metropolitan population of 1 million. I decided to go and do exactly what Adriana was, which was to study in the school. They give you a placement exam before you even arrive. And then they give you a little, sit down and kind of do a second test when you get there, and then they place you in a class. So I was with college students and old guys like myself, a whole mixture of people from all over the United States and some from other countries. There were some Germans, I think someone from Australia, a couple people from France, etc. It's a really nice group of people. So Bologna was originally an Etruscan city. It dates back to the 9th century BC when it was named Felsina. So many of these cities actually had multiple names over the course of their history. It was conquered by the Gauls in the 4th century BC. The Celts took it over and renamed it Bona. The Romans took it over starting in 196 BC and renamed it Bononia. And then it was later sacked several times by the Goths and the Lombards. During the Middle Ages, it was one of Europe's largest cities. And it was famous for its tall towers, and we'll see pictures of 2 remaining ones that remain to this day. Also, its churches, its lengthy porticos. You can walk on a hot summer day and avoid the heat by just walking under these porticos throughout the city. When it's raining, you can get to places and barely need an umbrella because you go under one portico to the next. The Black Death struck Bologna in 348, halving the size of the population from about 50 to 25,000. And then more plagues struck in the 16th and 17th centuries, costing Bologna a third of its population again. Napoleon entered the city on June 19th, 1796, and he briefly reinstated the ancient legal code allowing senators to come back and rule the city. Bologna was an industrial hub and a railway hub during World War II, so it suffered extensive damage. 43% of its buildings were damaged or destroyed. 2,500 people died in the air raids. Now today, Bologna is known as the capital of cuisine in Italy. So when you're trying to lose the Episcopate, it's probably not the place you want to go. But the homemade pasta and pasta bolognese, that's where it comes from. It's just fabulous. It's also the home to the oldest continuously operating university in the world. The University of Bologna was founded in 1088. It was founded because Constantinople was in a great decline, so they moved all the legal documents out of Constantinople to Ravenna, which I'll show slides of shortly. And they needed to figure out how to impart the legal knowledge and how to make judgments and decisions on this Roman law. So they moved it to Ravenna, but they built a law school not too far away in Bologna. When they built it, it was just a bunch of teachers, like people in this room, who said, I can teach that. And they started little, pockets of students who paid their fees directly to the teacher. So the university kind of was scattered all over the city and not centralized. It was later centralized. It was also one of the oldest medical schools in Europe, and maybe the first center for anatomy, which was taught there. The word universitas, university, was coined in Bologna. And some of the famous students include Dante, Boccaccio, and Petrarch. And finally, in 1732, Laura Bassi was the first woman to teach at any university in Europe. And she was appointed in that year. She became one of the leading humanists of her day and of all time. Today, the university has 80,000 students. So there's a huge young vibe to the city. It's a great place to visit because the historic center is so intact. There's so much to see, but it's not a big tourist destination. You go to Florence, completely, filled with tourists. You go to Venice, same. Rome, same. You go to Bologna, and you see a city that's working and living with people walking past 10th century monuments and buildings and using them every day. Our classroom was in the oldest noble's home left in Bologna. I think it dates to the 14th century. I mean, to have a classroom in a place like that is phenomenal. So this is one of my classes that I was in, just doing a selfie. I don't do a lot of selfies, but anyway, I just thought you ought to see. This is Massimo, who leads the school, and he would lead these great walking tours. And I know Adriana just thought the world of him, and he's such a great guy. He's standing in front of a building that is a pump station. So they have all sorts of elaborate water works underneath the city, and that's inside that home today in the downstairs cellar area. That's the statue of Neptune. It's the Plaza de Nettuno, right in the heart of Bologna. So you're walking past things like this every day. Those are the great towers, the two biggest ones still remaining. They're kind of a work project right now to kind of shore them up. And this is a cooking class. Adriana, I think you took some of the cooking classes too, right? Yeah. They were a blast. I'm not a great cook, hardly at all. So it was really fascinating to see how they make pasta homemade. And it gave me an enormous appreciation. I mean, the amount of time it takes to make a meal with homemade pasta is a ton. So that's what it looks like. Then there are all sorts of different kinds we made, and then that's the finished product right there. Deliciosa. Their art museum is probably underappreciated, and it is a jewel. I never got drawn into like the Sienese art and the medieval Italian art until I spent my a month in Italy, and it just kind of popped out in a new way for me. And when you really appreciate these paintings by people like Cimabue and Giotto, close up, they're absolutely magical. They're all religiously based. These incredible crucifixes that you find in Italy and really nowhere else in that same design and shape. And all of these speak so profoundly about the communion of saints and theology. The best theologians in Italy were the artists. They really understood and led the way. Now, on I think my last full day in Bologna, I happened to meet this professor at the History Museum, not a very visited place in the city. And he said to me, and there was one other person there, he said, "Would you like a private tour?" I said, "Yes, by all means." So I had an hour and a half private tour with this Italian professor of history, and it was all in Italian. And it was like the greatest benchmark to say, could I understand this? And so I was able to track almost all of the ideas he said. I can't speak it all back, but it was a real joy. And he showed everything from the great ceramic work, which was influenced often by ceramic work in Spain. And there he is outside the museum. That's where I had my Last Supper, so to speak, in Bologna. It's one of the towers, and you can actually eat inside the fortified tower or outside. That's one of the great popes. I think it was Pope Gregory the Ninth. And you pass by his statue every single day. That's the great cathedral where Charlemagne was consecrated the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire in the year 800 in Reims Cathedral in France, but was also consecrated in this cathedral as well. It's like a double baptism. That's inside of an incredible church where you've got a structure right inside this beautiful octagonal structure. This is the church over here where Saint Dominic is buried. And we had walked past it. Massimo, I'm not sure Massimo explained that San Domenico was buried there, but he's the founder of the Dominican order, which is spread all around the world. They are best known as great preachers. And so if many of you grew up in the Catholic Church, if you said the preaching was awful, they probably weren't Dominicans, because the Dominicans really preach at a very high level. Now, this is the tomb of San Domenico. And so for me, as Anglicans, we don't run around the world necessarily looking for relics, but when you realize that one of the great religious leaders you've read about and studied and learned from is buried in a place like this, it's kind of like going to Lincoln's memorial, or a place and having a sense of the importance of that in history, but in this case, in the history of our faith and the faith content. 3 of the statues on the front here were done by Michelangelo, including the angel down at the bottom right-hand side, which is deemed not to be as elegant as the angel on the left-hand side. This was the young Michelangelo who was still learning his trade. And in the back, there's an opening where you can see a reliquary with some of the bones and the fragments of the body of St. Dominic. Now, the good news is probably all of us are safe. In the Anglican tradition, we believe that all of us share in a priesthood. But none of us probably will get called a saint. And so no one's going to take your bones and leave them out for posterity for centuries later. But that's what they do with the saints in Europe and other places. This is one of the markets, walking through Bologna. This gentleman, it looks kind of a nondescript photo, but it's meaningful to me because I brought some Italian books. I'm sitting in this little trattoria eating dinner, and I thought, I'm just going to keep reading my books because I don't want to speak English and other languages, just want to focus on Italian. And lo and behold, it turns out he is American, but over tiramisu, I spoke to him across the tables, and it turns out he's done a lot of Caminos. So he reels off like 10 Caminos he's done. I reel off 10 Caminos I've done, and we're just comparing notes. And then he told me this story. He said, I had a very mixed relationship with my father. My father was kind of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He could be incredibly gracious and loving, or he could be a mean SOB and very, very difficult. And he said, I started several companies. I did well in my business career. But I was kind of tormented by this relationship with my father. And he said one evening while he was doing one of his caminos, he had a dream. And he had this sense of forgiveness with his father. And it was like all was past. And he woke up crying. And he suddenly realized that the purpose of all these caminos and journeys he had done was to arrive at that moment of forgiveness and to let that go. When you walk on a camino, you have to let things go. You cannot be lugging too much weight. You have to let some people go who you've been walking with, who are going to stay 2 or 3 days, or they're giving up. They're only walking for a week. You're going further. So you give up people. You give up places. You travel lightly. And the only way for you and I to really travel forward successfully in life is to travel lightly and not be burdened by things, especially relationships where we felt hurt or diminished. And so he said, I no longer feel like I have to do any more caminos. I've done them. And in that moment, I realized the same thing. I don't have to, I had a goal of walking 5,000 miles across caminos in Europe. I got to 2,500, and I realized I don't have to do more. There's nothing to prove. That's why that guy was so important to me. This is the anatomy room. It's the oldest anatomy room in Europe. Those statues are all handcrafted statues of the original 24 teachers of anatomy at the University of Bologna's medical school for anatomy. And a bomb hit this during World War II and blew the entire thing apart. And they took all the fragments and painstakingly put it back magnificently. Now this is right near, it's where the library is, the oldest library. These are all scudos or shields, family crests of students who studied at the university. You're immortalized. This is the room over on the left-hand side where I'd study. I think it dates back to like the 12th century. Can you imagine studying in a room like that and just bringing your books and setting up? And this is the church where, one of the churches in Bologna. I went to see some statues. They were on display in one of the churches of the women reacting to having found Christ's body after he'd been crucified. Some of the most incredible statues I've ever seen in capturing the horror and the grief of the loss of our Lord. And this is what the whole collection looks like together. Absolutely astounding. And this is, I get my little diploma for 2 weeks of studying. Now this is Ravenna. Now Ravenna is where Dante went when he was exiled. You can see his tomb here, and inside his tomb. Again, it was kind of like a subconscious bucket list for me to visit this because he's an incredible poet. He wrote in Italian versus Latin, and they said that St. Francis of Assisi, who wrote the Canticle to Brother Sun, inspired Dante to do that, to write in Italian. The Canticle to Brother Sun is the oldest existing poem we have in Italian. Dante devotes 80 verses of the Divina Commedia, the Divine Comedy, to St. Francis. And so he wrote in Italian. It's medieval Italian. You can read it and understand it fairly well. And it is the most beautiful lyrical thing you've ever read. It is the dialect of Florence. And so it became the language of all of Italy because that book was so popular and read by so many people. Much the same way that when Martin Luther translated the Bible into German, he used the Bavarian dialect that he spoke. And then that became the dialect for all of Germany. It became the German language as we know it today. So that's Dante's death mask. This is the interior courtyard of where his house is. So a couple things about Ravenna. Ravenna was founded in 49 BC. It was originally founded by the Umbri people, who are said to be the oldest existing people in all of Italy. In 49 BC, Julius Caesar gathered his forces in Ravenna before crossing the Rubicon. Ravenna came under Roman control in 89 BC. Octavian built the military harbor of Classis at Ravenna. Ravenna is now silted up, so the only way to get to the coast is through a series of canals. It's like Ostia Antica outside of Rome that's now silted up, and you can't actually get to the coast from there. But it was once a great military and maritime place. Excuse me. It was conquered by the Byzantines in 540 AD and then fell under Lombard control and was under their control under the control of the papacy until 1861 when Garibaldi unified Italy. So prior to 1861, Italy was a whole collection of feudal states. It was not one unified country, but Garibaldi helped to pull it together in one. Ravenna is known as the capital of mosaics. It has some of the finest mosaics in the entire world, and 8 of its buildings are part of the UNESCO World Heritage Monuments Collection. So these are some of the mosaics. This is in the baptistery. The mosaics are breathtaking. And there are people that go to study making mosaics to their... This is the outside the octagonal baptistery. They were the most beautiful mosaics I've ever seen in my life. And if you've ever been to Santa Maria Maggiore in Italy, one of the 4 major basilicas in Italy, they have world-class mosaics, but these I thought were just breathtaking. Thank you so much, Shay. This church, upon entering it, I had to say, it's got to be one of the top 5 or 10 most beautiful churches I've ever seen in the world. And that says a lot, because I've been in so many. The architecture, that's just looking up from the center, utterly breathtaking. So, moving on to, this is Verona. So Verona dates back to 550 BC. It was officially classified as a Roman city in 49 BC. It's set on the river Adige, and it has a population of about 250,000, but the metropolitan area is 715,000. It's a major tourist destination in the north of Italy. Shakespeare set 2 of his plays there. Which 2 plays? Romeo and Juliet. 2 Gentlemen from Verona. And you can actually see the house where, in the balcony where Juliet was wooed by Romeo, but it's all fake because it's much more recent than the play, but still there's a crowd of people that go and take photos there. We don't know whether Shakespeare actually ever went to Verona, but it's a magnificent setting. The city is the birthplace of Isotta Nagarola, who is one of the first major humanists of the Renaissance. Fascism also had a major chapter here. The largest, they had rallies and all sorts of things for Mussolini here. The Manifesto of Race, a series of anti-Semitic laws, was passed in 1938. And in 1943, when the Nazis took over, they rounded up Jews and sent them off to concentration camps in Germany. A show trial was held in this city on the banks of the river for Benito Mussolini's son-in-law, who they accused of trying to have a plot to overthrow the Republican government. He was found guilty and executed along with several followers right by the riverside. And the closing ceremonies of the 2026 Winter Olympics will be held in Verona. This is the ancient Colosseum where they have opera held every every summer. And so just a magnificent setting for that. The largest plaza, there's the balcony where they say that Juliet appeared to Romeo. The churches were breathtaking. The mosaics, on the tiles on the floor, all made of marble from different parts of Italy and other places in the world, are extraordinary. Even a little font for holy water has that little figure holding it up. And this is in a 15th century building that was a restaurant, and then to have two dishes like that were magnificent. This is a modern sculpture. Even the modern sculptures are breathtaking. And this is the Giardini dei Giusti, I believe, Di Giusti. Just stunning on the outskirts of the town. Colosseum, and then one of the famous bridges across the river Adige. And this is where the patron saint of the city, Zeno, is buried. Now to Venice. I'd been to Venice before. Our daughter, Marguerite, had worked for 6 months at the Peggy Guggenheim collection. It's one of the best internships of any art museum in the world. And the folks who are interns there refer to themselves as Googies. And Marguerite has friends ranging from St. Petersburg in Russia to Australia and all over the world who she got to know while working there. So she's spent a total of probably maybe 9 months all told in Venice, and because of her, I really wanted to go back and see more. If you're not aware of this, Venice is built on 126 different islands that are connected by 472 bridges. The islands are in the shallows of the Venetian lagoon, enclosed by the mouths of two rivers, the Po and the Piave rivers. Greater Venice has 258,000 people, but the city itself now is reduced to 51,000 and shrinking. It's become incredibly expensive to live there. So if you're just doing an ordinary job, it's almost impossible for you to stay in Venice anymore. And Airbnb has not helped either, because people are renting out their house to tourists who come in, and as a result, people can't afford to own a house or keep a house. The name of the city comes from the ancient Veneti people who inhabited the region in the 10th century BC. Charlemagne's son Pepin tried to overtake the city in a failed siege in the year 810. During the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, Venice became a financial and maritime capital, and it was a staging place for the Crusades and for the Battle of Lepanto. The Black Death devastated Venice in 1348. Plague struck again in 1575 and 1630, killing 150 Venetian citizens. The city-state of Venice is the first international financial capital of the world. And it rose to its prominence in the 14th century when it peaked. Venice once possessed numerous territories across the Adriatic Sea, and in World War II was relatively free of damage. The British did some pinpoint bombing in the area, but other than that, it's remained free of that. It's divided into 6 different districts. I stayed in the Dorso d'Oro, which is the one I'd recommend if you go over. It's the quietest district in the whole island. And flooding is a huge problem. In 1966, 80% of the city was flooded. The Cathedral of San Marco is only 25 inches above sea level. It's routinely flooded, and they've lost lots of cultural things there over the years as a result. In 2003, the Prime Minister, who is kind of like, he was crazy, Silvio Berlusconi, did initiate a movement for the MOSE project, MOSE, which was to put these floating stations that would keep the waters from coming in. It was set to cost $800 million. There was tons of corruption, at least $2 billion worth of corruption. The price tag rose to between $7 and $9 billion for that project. And it's still debatable how well it works. So many of you have been here. It's a magical place to eat a meal looking out over a view like that. This is inside the Cathedral of St. Mark's. The lion is the symbol. The lion is the symbol of St. Mark. Each of the evangelists has a symbol. Like John is the eagle, because is believed to be the only animal that could fly directly in the sun and fly higher than any other bird. And so they said John's gospel takes us further than any other gospel in its mystical nature. Now this is in the Jewish quarter. There are 2 synagogues that remain to this day. And sadly, Jews in Venice were rounded up and deported during World War II and sent to concentration camps. They're stunning synagogues. And this is a memorial to the Jews who were deported. The Bridge of Sighs. Now this is a town that has a chessboard built on the main plaza, and every other year they have a chess match with live figures. This is Castel de Franca, a walled city. This is Bassano del Grappa, and this bridge was built originally, I think, in 1594, designed by Palladio, and it's a wonder, but it's been destroyed many times since, including the last time, World War II, when it was destroyed. But the Alpine soldiers are so fond of this bridge, they raised a collection and had it rebuilt exactly as it was. This is a wonderful city to visit. Hemingway was stationed there during World War I as an ambulance driver. He was wounded by shrapnel. He had to recover. The building where this museum it now is was a noble's house that turned it over to become a hospital during World War I. He convalesced in that hospital, and he wrote a farewell to arms while living in Bassano del Grappa. I'm a huge Hemingway fan, so I had to go visit this little museum. I'm like the only person the whole day that was in there. Now this is Cittadella, a walled city, one of the most magnificent walled cities I've ever been in. Incredibly intact. It has a Duomo in the center and just a lively group of people just out to dinner and living. The city is a living ancient city. Sometimes places like Toledo in Spain, there is probably not a single store in the historic quarter that's geared towards people living in Toledo. It's all based for tourists. This is not like that. Now this is Vicenza, where Andrea Palladio lived and rebuilt the entire city to some extent. And to fall in hard times, they gave this local architect a chance to rebuild. And this is the famous three-dimensional theater that he designed. That is one of the models or maquettes. And this is some of the structures that he helped to create in Vicenza. They have one of the world's greatest icon collections there. And this, of course, the rotunda which he designed influenced Thomas Jefferson to build his home in Monticello. I'll just take you briefly through Florence. The Uffizi is absolutely breathtaking. Caravaggio's work there, the outside of the Uffizi, the Pitti Palace, the Duomo. This is San Miniato overlooking Florence, the Ponte Vecchio. Now this is what I wanted to see. I wanted to see the Monasterio de San Marco, where Savonarola, that charismatic preacher, you hear about the bonfire of the vanities, he was accused of heresy and put to death. But in the monastery, they had paintings by Giotto in every monk's cell. So each monk had an exquisite painting by Giotto in his cell. I just captured a few of these. And that's Savonarola. And this is looking down the corridor in the monastery. I had been to Florence twice before, but had never had a chance to see the monastery. Now this is the church of the Scorvini Chapel, which in 1300 Giotto got to do the paintings in here that are absolutely breathtaking. This too I'd never had a chance to visit. I hadn't been to Padua before, And they give you 15 minutes. You go on a tour, you have 15 minutes in this incredible chapel, and then you have to exit. Now this is Assisi, and I'll say a couple things about Assisi, and I'm going to kind of wind it down with this. Let me just find the... Well, so Assisi is an incredibly ancient city. This is the Temple of Minerva right here that is now Santa Maria sopra Minerva. So it's a city where they've got an old Roman temple built, and now it's been converted into a church. And underneath you have the Roman Forum, an amphitheater, a theater, and they found remnants of a villa with so intact in several of the rooms that the only thing similar that they have in all of Italy would be found in Pompeii. This is the main plaza. I was a stone's throw away from this where I stayed. This is the Basilica de St. Francis, San Francesco. He would have hated this. He did not believe you should build churches. Although he restored San Damiano and several other churches, but he didn't want anything extravagant, especially in his name. But they built it after he had died, and every year now, 4 million people come to visit Assisi. Without something like this, that would not be possible. And they've had several world peace conferences and environmental conferences in Assisi, attending the Mass here down. Now, these are some of the garments that St. Francis wore. And that's his tomb on the left. This is a young boy who died, I think, at the age of 17. He's been canonized as the youngest saint, I think maybe in history, and he's known as a saint for the internet because he used the internet to evangelize. And his body lies in Assisi. This is the countryside. I just took walks out where Francis himself would have walked. I went up to his hermitage, which I hadn't been able to visit when I was previously there. This is one of the young Franciscan monks. This is an oratory where he would have gathered in prayer with his followers. A altar where he would have celebrated. That is the bed where he would lay down and sleep literally on stone. That's the hermitage up there. These are the outside walls of Assisi. It's a magnificent city to walk around. This is the Portiuncula, which is the original church where he gathered his followers. He gathered 11 people to be with him, and then before he died, there were about 10,000 Franciscans all around Europe. Unbelievable. He only lived 44 years. The first 24 years he spent as a troubadour, a party boy, dressed in the most lavish clothes he could. His father was a cloth merchant, squandered money, partied like crazy. They said he lost his virginity. He was not the poster boy for being a saint. It's the last 20 years that absolutely changed the world. He's considered to be the alter Christus, the person who lived the most Christ-like life in history after Jesus. This is the famous picture by Giotto of Francis feeding the birds and preaching to them. This is the chapel where St. Clare of Assisi, who was one of his followers who came from a noble family, against the will of her parents, became a nun and helped, along with Francis, to start the Order of the Poor Ladies, that name was changed to the Order of the Poor Clares. This is the Roccamaggiore, the great castle overlooking Assisi. That is the cloister from San Damiano. That's a view from the Roccamaggiore. And this is some of the underground passages under the city. Now this, I'll just take you to Rome. This is one of Bernini's sculptures, which were the most magnificent sculpture. I'm a huge fan of Auguste Rodin, but Bernini's right up there. They have 5 Caravaggios in this museum. It's phenomenal. This is the Gallery Borghese, which is my favorite museum in Rome. This statue is utterly breathtaking. This is Santa Maria sopra Minerva. This is where it was 2 minutes from my hotel. I stumbled upon it and this is the Pantheon, which is 2 minutes away also, inside sopra Minerva. And there in the altar, I asked where St. Catherine is buried, and the priest said, right there. So I went over, and you can actually walk in under the altar and place your prayer on write a prayer on a piece of paper and lay it right on her tomb. And there you see some of the prayers there. This is where the community of San Egidio, which is one of the most, I think, spectacular religious communities that's been formed in the last 40 years. It was started by an Italian professor, not a priest, who gathered and gave reflections to students, and it's a community based of young people all throughout Rome, but now becoming worldwide. This is right near the Palatine Hill, and I'm closing with these shots. This is an old Roman house in incredible shape that you can tour to this day. And that is the chapel to a building I'm going to show you. This is the building. Has anyone been to San Gregorio El Magno? This house belonged to a man named Gregory, who had this as a 5th century villa. And he turned it over to become a Benedictine monastery when he joined the monastery, and said, let's use my house. Let's use the rectory to become a monastic order or something. There are enough rooms in it probably to get a small group going. They turned this over. He turned this villa over to become a monastery. He went on to become the Pope, one of a handful of popes in history to have the name Great bestowed upon him, Gregory the Great. And it overlooks the Palatine Hills. I've stayed here several times for about $80 a night. You have a small room that's about the size of a college dorm room, but you have a breathtaking view. It's a 2-minute walk to the Colosseum. This is the interior. Why is this chair important? Because from this chair, Pope Gregory the Great commissioned one of his monks, a fellow named Augustine, in the year 596 or 596 or 597, to go to bring Christianity to the Anglos. They had been walking side by side through one of the Roman markets and saw slaves being sold. They had blonde hair and blue eyes. And Pope Gregory the Great said to Augustine, who are these people? He said, they're Anglos. He said, do they know Christ? He said, no, they're pagans. He said, then you must go and bring Christ to them. And so he set out, and it may have been 596, because he got across Gaul, France, with 40 monks, and he heard these terrible stories about the Anglos, that they were cannibals. They would kill everyone upon arrival and just hack their bodies to pieces. So they went back to Rome. When he got back to Rome, Gregory said, what the heck are you doing here? He said, well, I've been told these terrible stories. These people are going to mutilate us, blah, blah, blah. He said, go. So he had to turn around and go. He arrives on the shores of Kent in the year 597, having been commissioned by Gregory from this chair in this monastery, which was his 5th century villa, and he brought Christianity to England. And he found out the king's wife was from Norway, and she was already a Christian. And so she gave them a plot of land to build St. Martin's Church, the oldest church in all of England, and then a plot of land to build a monastery, and that is now in ruins because they moved to another part of Canterbury where they lived, and that monastery they created is Canterbury Cathedral, the mother church cathedral for the entire 85 million member Anglican Communion in 68 different countries around the world. That concludes my presentation. Great to be with you. Sorry to keep you late. And thank you again for a magnificent opportunity to learn so much, see so much, and to grow as a result. God bless you.